You asked for it. A few videos ago, I played Dyson Sphere program for the first time, but I beat it with a bunch of spaghetti in one solar system, and a ton of you wanted me to build way bigger. Well, gosh, if you insist. So today we'll be hunting for one of this game's most elusive achievements. Data rules everything around me, which requires a sustained 1 million research hashes per second. To give you a sense of scale, that requires maybe 2,000 labs just doing research, which is a bit more than our current stack of, 5. So, yeah, we're going to need many planets worth of resources, and probably multiple Dyson spheres for the 130-ish gigawatts of power it'll all take. But it would be a shame to let the like and subscribe sphere remain unfinished, don't you think? Now, you may have guessed this already, but right now we don't even have a base that can build a base that can build a 1 million hash capable megabase. I handcrafted almost this entire thing, and its supply lines are running about as smoothly as the Strait of Hormuz during a pandemic, so we need to start with some triage. For example, I don't want to spend what little material we currently have building out power or antimatter when neither is currently bottlenecking us. So for now, we'll pull the plug on the rather expensive carrier rockets. In lieu of that, let's invest in a few technologies that will help ease our resource demand, like all 3 levels of Proliferator, the magical substance that multiplies whatever you spray it on. If Factorio has taught me anything, it's that compounding returns at every link in a supply chain is good. We'll also queue up a gas giant exploitation, which lets us place glorified logistic stations on gaseous planets to get free hydrogen, or some other fancy resources we'll talk about later. A couple people were upset last video that I didn't research fractionation, which has a 1% chance to convert said hydrogen into the more valuable deuterium. I would like for those people to look very closely at the fractionation recipe. Where exactly does it tell you that it gives you the hydrogen back the other 99% of the time? You bet I used the particle collider to make deuterium. I thought that was 50 times better. Anyway, after we top off our research queue with some faster assemblers, we'll need to start pulling some items off belts and into boxes. Building a million hash megabase will require plenty of supplies, which means we need a mall. But making a mall in this game is a challenge at the best of times, as you'll see, so the next best thing is to cache a bunch of intermediates to assist handcrafting. The various logistic automatons aren't the most intuitive aspect of Dyson Sphere, but it helps to assign them Factorio analogs. Bots are just like Factorio's logistic bots, moving items between boxes and the player. Drones are like trains, moving items between stations on the same planet, and vessels are like platforms, moving items between stations on different planets. But we're not making any of those automatically because, again, no mall yet. For now, we'll also cache some ingredients for these by extending this processor belt past the purple science stack and putting any extra into a box. We'll also do the same for circuits, microcrystalline components, basically any intermediate that could reasonably be considered a mall input ingredient. Some other intermediates I can tear down. We have a mostly reliable supply of off-world silicon right now, so this stone to silicon chain can go away. Next, I tried drafting what a mall might look like. At first, I figure I'll set this up exactly like a Factorio bot mall, with each assembler getting 1 input chest and 1 output chest. Until I discover that these little hat things which enable logistics on chests can only be filtered to a single item. That means if an item required 5 ingredients, it would need 5 input chests. That's technically doable, but pretty painful. Though not nearly as painful as what I'll do to Mr. Flatvoice if he keeps repeating things he's already told me. So instead, let's try to use planetary logistics stations instead of chests, since those can hold 4 types of items apiece. But not so fast. Stations like these can't directly interface with ordinary bots, so I'll also need to input supplies into stations rather than chests. At least that's easy for hydrogen now that we've researched orbital collectors, which are those glorified logistics stations I mentioned a minute ago. Making them is a little finicky because they require fully charged accumulators as an ingredient, which you can only make by charging empty ones in this special building called an energy exchanger. For now, we'll make those in a box-fed build that I just shoved somewhere it would fit. Once we've made a collector, we head next door to place it and can see it start to gather hydrogen and even a bit of deuterium. We won't bother with the latter for a while, though. The former I'd like to assign priority over the oil build's hydrogen output to conserve crude, which necessitates this horrible belt turn over the refined oil line. That belt will feed hydrogen out of the same interplanetary logistics station that we're currently using to get titanium and silicon products from this system's outermost planet. Then, rather than set up another station to get hydrogen into the green science build on the other end of the base, we'll just extend the hydrogen belt past the red science and all the way over there. Sometimes, to clean up a mess, you have to start by making a bigger mess. It's not all for the worse, though. This belt was supplementing iron input to the main base, but the iron patch dried up and now this belt is useless. I love the chain delete feature. Okay, let's take a crack at designing an actual mall. This game does have a sandbox feature, but I didn't learn that until much later, so...
We'll do it live!
Here's the idea. 2 input logistics stations that each output 3 belts of ingredients, which feed 4 assemblers. Each assembler thus has access to 6 belts of inputs and a dedicated output to a 3rd logistics station. We can assign any combination of recipes to the 4 assemblers, provided they all share some set of up to 6 input ingredients. This design should work well, but even these little single-planet logistics stations take up a decent chunk of space, so we'll need to find somewhere away from the main base to put them. This area to the west looks like a good spot. And the first thing I'd like to make automatically is the drones that actually move items between logistics stations on the same planet, since they're what move items into and out of this mall design. This is when I learned that you can right-click a stack of items to bring up a slider that lets you select exactly how many of that item you want to grab from the stack. Nifty. Because I'm obsessed with compactness, I'm rotating every other mall block 180 degrees so we can jam them that little bit closer together. Aside from drones, I want to start this mall by making a bunch of intermediate ingredients. They'll be used in a lot of future mall products, but we don't have dedicated production areas for them. Yet. But all these production chains have to start somewhere, which means we also need to figure out how to get supplies into the mall in the first place, ideally while keeping the existing base running because we still have research to do. For now, we'll just swipe some iron and copper from a green science input line. Vessels and drones cannot resupply the player, only bots can do that. So actually getting mall supplies from these logistics stations automatically requires pushing them out into regular old boxes. I wonder why this one isn't topping me off with supplies before finally figuring out that I didn't set a minimum quantity. Whoops. This station that I've set up to draw graphite from the red science build can also serve as input for stone and glass, since there's a stone line we can extend right next door. Logistics stations apparently need a healthy amount of personal space, so I have to rip up this mall block and replace it 1 tile further west. But after setting it to work making some assorted circuit-related intermediates, I try placing another mall block and make a rather nasty discovery. Collision in this game is based on arc distance, not grid distance. 11 tiles of space was far enough apart when I placed these stations by the equator, but because this game tries to wrap square-based grids around literal globes, the size of the tiles shrink the further you get towards the poles. Here by the tropic line, those same 11 tiles are suddenly too close together. I was hoping to keep these mall blocks in nice neat columns, but that would apparently require ripping out the mall block above and moving it one tile west again. And at the moment, I'm more annoyed at the game for springing this on me than I am at the asymmetry. Whatever, it's not like this will be our final mall anyway. This is just the bootstrap mall that will get us to the real mall. Anyway, I decide to use this one for prisms and titanium glass. The latter takes water, so this input line can get rerouted to come straight from a pump instead of the logistics station. Then some plasma exciters and photon combiners, since those both take prisms, and then some titanium crystal, which goes into Casimir crystals, which goes into plane filters. Since those recipes feed into each other telescopically, I'd like to direct insert between assemblers, but these are too far apart for a sorter to span the distance. Instead, we can use a very silly 3-tile long belt to move items from one assembler to the next. Graphene and carbon nanotubes can enter the logistics system over here by purple science. Or they could if there was already foundation placed over this water. This game does have a force-building technique of sorts for auto-placing foundation, but as far as I can tell, it's only available when placing blueprints, and not when you're just placing singular entities in the overworld. Here I get a brilliant idea. Instead of flying iron products in from literally halfway around the globe, why not just tap this iron patch that's right here? At first, I thought I'd take this opportunity to try out the advanced miner, but that needs grating crystal to craft. The starting solar system doesn't have any, and I still don't have the upgrade that would let me view resources in other systems, so I have to stick with the regular miners for now. Some more mall blocks, and now we have particle broadband, particle containers, quantum chips, and frame material. The last of those needs titanium alloy to make, so I have to shove in a logistics station right by this coal patch because it's literally the only place I could find anywhere near where the alloy is being made. Now that we're actually producing some intermediate ingredients, it's time to put them to use. The first thing we'll need to mass produce are belts. Each speed tier takes the previous tier as input and not much else, so we'll make this custom block where each assembler feeds into the next, plus a box to store extra tier 1 belts just in case we need to rely on the cheap stuff, a decision that will soon prove to be prescient. Then we'll do the same thing for sorters and power poles, although there's not quite enough room in one planetary logistics station for frame material for the substations. Rather than put up another station just for that, I take the lazy way out and add frame material to one of the neighboring stations and just belt it over. After setting up assemblers, it occurs to me that we're going to need a lot of graphene for both those and the highest tier of belts, so we should shore that up next. That starts with oil, and this time around I'm not messing with cracking because I don't want the hydrogen it would give us. Instead, I'm sticking with stock refining, plus the reformed refinement recipe that lets us add coal to hydrogen and refined oil to get out even more refined oil. We need that refined oil to make sulfuric acid. Eventually, we'll be able to pump this stuff straight out of the ground on other planets, but again, we still don't know where any such planet could be. So for now, we're making acid the hard way. We need water and stone for our acid, and the nearest free stone patch is way the hell up by the North Pole. In retrospect, I could have gotten drones to fly this down instead of running such a stupid belt, but I was still getting used to Dyson Sphere's logistic paradigm here, so you'll just have to forgive me. And on that note, we can delete this one sad graphene plant and replace it with another stupid belt. We still need graphene here for our purple science. Any extra that's not being eaten by carbon nanotubes can get diverted into this logistic station that's already here. And rather than steal some of these nanotubes, which would eat into our purple science capacity, we can just belt graphene out of that logistic station, nanotube it, and belt it right back in. This graphene recipe eats a ton of graphite, and our coal patches won't last forever, but we only need this to bootstrap us to the eventual, better recipe. For example, we now have the nanotube headroom to expand our particle broadband production, so our purple science is no longer constantly choking to death. What is choking to death is everything mall-related that's dependent on electric motors, because one assembler making those just isn't enough. So we'll hastily tack on a few more assemblers for them, and then do the same for their component gears. Okay, now that we've isolated graphene, I want to chip away at this chemical plant spaghetti nightmare. First, we'll need to set up a bit more refined oil and graphite to make a dedicated plastic build. This routing of the belt for said plastic might not look like much of an improvement, but I promise you we'll clean this up. While I'm doing some more runtime patching, we finally get the next Cosmic Exploration upgrade, which lets us view resource reserves in nearby star systems, like this planet that has a sulfuric acid ocean, or this ice giant that's like a gas giant except it also gives something called fire ice. We'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to make sure that this star system is stable and secure before leaving for another one. So here's a dedicated logistics station making tons of space combat ships called corvettes. See, every system in the game has a dark fog hive in orbit, which is responsible for spawning resource outposts on the local planets. Leave those outposts or the hive itself in place, and eventually they'll attack your factory. We do have shields and turrets, but wouldn't it be so much better to just wipe them off the face of the solar system? Well, it would be better if I was sufficiently equipped to do that. Our single Corvette fleet dwindles pretty quickly, and before long, I'm out of power and dead. New plan. Take down the planetary resource outposts first, which in theory should starve the hive and soften it up. That still won't be easy. They only have bases on one planet in this system, but that planet has a whopping 10 outposts. Apparently, you can deploy your space fleets to attack the floating relay station bits even when you're on the ground, which will be a really nice trick the few times I actually remember to do that this run. But space fleets can't attack ground units. I don't have any ground units of my own because they suck, which would be fine, but guess who forgot to bring missile turrets? Let's try that again. Geothermal power plants can be placed on the exposed lava for free power, although its efficiency varies from tile to tile. But that lets us power the missile battery that I remembered to bring this time. Much better. I forgot the space fleet trick already, but the good news is that you can place a geothermal plant on the hull that the ground base leaves behind, and not only does it give you free power, the relay station above it just flies off. Eventually, I have to pause our conquest because I didn't bring enough geothermal plants. They take supermagnetic rings, which take graphite and steel, so I need to set up a tiny bit of smelting for coal and iron. We need a good number of those plants because if you don't plug the core holes, the relay stations will just keep trying to rebuild the bases. Peace at last. This seems like a nice place for a smelting outpost, don't you think? For now, that will consist of a single smelted Tier 1 belt of iron, copper, steel, and titanium directly into a single interplanetary logistics station. We're still very much in the ramping up phase, so this little build is about all we can afford right now. Okay, in the last Dyson Sphere video, we had this graphite overflow from oil cracking feeding into a battery of thermal generators to keep the hydrogen flowing. But we're getting all our hydrogen from the neighboring gas giant now, so the cracking can go away and so can the thermal generators. That means we'll want to get our graphite from smelted coal. So for now we'll just extend this coal belt out of the oil build, tack on some smelters, and route the new graphite back into the green science build. Said build is an awful spaghetti monstrosity, but we're finally in a position to start untangling it. For example, we can take some steel imports from the lava planet and route that directly into the titanium alloy, instead of this horrible curved belt coming off one upstream steel smelter that's just leaching off an iron ore line. Most of that ore line can also go away, to be replaced with imported iron plate. I know this looks like we're just trading one kind of spaghetti for another right now, but trust me when I say this is 1, an improvement, and 2, actually temporary. Doing the same swap with copper plate lets us get rid of this very long copper ore input belt. This is what I mean by an improvement. We're at least condensing the mess. Further cleanup will benefit from simpler production chains, so this is a good time to start looking into rare resources. Fractal silicon and kimberlite ore become crystal silicon and diamond, respectively, at a very beneficial 1:2 ratio. So remember how I mentioned ice giants earlier? The infinite supply of fire ice they provide you with can be turned directly into 2 parts graphene and 1 part hydrogen. That sounds incredibly useful, so after warping over and setting up a few orbital collectors, we'll slap down a new logistics station next to Green Science to receive it. We're putting it here because the logistics vessels that will carry the fire ice need warpers to move between systems, and Green Science is the most efficient source of warpers. Now, since this process has 2 products, we need to manage both carefully, lest we end up short on one and backed up on the other. The sensible thing to do is to set this hydrogen up to be consumed with priority over any other source of it, which starts by not bringing in any hydrogen overflow from the red science input line clear on the other side of the base. Also, that graphene build we just set up a few minutes ago, obsolete already. This and everything that supports it can get torn down, along with the corresponding nanotube plants. We'll still need nanotubes over here, though, and this is when the concept of moving everything with the logistics system finally started to click. Why run yet another stupidly long belt from the Green Science graphene build all the way over to purple, when I can just put down another interplanetary logistics station, bring in more fire ice, and make more graphene right here? We can even drone over some Green Science, turn it into warpers, and put the warpers right back into the station. Since this graphene build is the closer one to the mall, naturally we'll want to make this graphene logistic accessible. And since we're getting the fire ice to make it from a logistic station, the easiest place to put that graphene is right back where the fire ice came from. The hydrogen we don't care about, so red science can eat that. Then we'll pull the same trick with nanotubes. Graphene and titanium ingots out, nanotubes right back in. And then nanotubes back out again so we can keep the particle broadband fed for purple science. Next, I want some more titanium alloy, so we're graduating from 1 smelter here between purple and yellow science to as many smelters as I can fit in the space, which ends up being 4. The component metals get shipped in from the lava planet. Sulfuric acid we'll still have to make locally for now, but let's at least double that. The next rare resource on our list is that grading crystal I mentioned earlier. My chat kept yelling at me that the advanced miners were good, so let's find a nearby planet that has some of those crystals. Welcome to the Ice Frostia biome, and there's grading crystal right next to where we landed. Ooh, okay, I'm sold. The increased resource patch coverage is good enough on its own, but they also hook directly into the drone network, so you don't even have to run belts to get their resources out. Unless you just really want to for some reason. After clearing this planet of its invasive synthetic species, I noticed that it also has kimberlite, so naturally we'll grab that to clean up our diamond chain. Since we're not strong enough to kill hives yet, I want to be prepared for landing relay stations that might crop up here again in the future when we're not around to deal with them. Basically, that means putting signal towers by our important infrastructure, so the missile turrets we'll leave behind can deal with anything that happens to get angry at them. I want to remember where this planet is and what it's providing, and renaming the planet seems like a decent enough way to accomplish that.
What are you going to call it?
I think I'll call it Bob.
Bob?
You don't like Bob?
You can't call a planet Bob.
But if you want to see that information from the cluster view, you have to rename the entire star system. Then I discover that this game has a shockingly extensive mecha customization feature, which I cannot bring myself to care about. If I felt like tricking out a Gundam, I'd go play Armored Core. Anyway, we have a better source of diamonds than smelted graphite now, so I get to work replacing those in the yellow science pipeline, plus setting up a new production spot for more advanced miners. They mine a lot faster than regular miners too. Just swapping out the old miner on this copper patch for an upgraded one nearly saturates its output again. Then graphene production gets clogged on its hydrogen byproduct. So I come up with the brilliant solution of burning off the hydrogen in a load of incinerators. It also turns out these are pass-through, so you can chain them together for even more hydrogen deletion. Let's see. Next on the agenda is mining organic crystal directly, so we can clean up that awful plastic-based crystal production process and everything required to support that. We land on a lush green world brimming with oil and coal, and you know what that means. Time to deliver some freedom. The only unrealistic part is that this operation is powered by geothermal and wind. With some off-grid rotation and a bit of pixel peeping, we can cover the whole organic crystal patch with a single advanced miner. Push those into a logistic station and we have ourselves some fresh organic crystals. Back home, we switch this other logistic station by the yellow science to receive organic crystal rather than provide it. And just like that, we can tear down the entire organic crystal production line. The graphite smelters can go too, but my inventory is full and I don't like littering, so I'm trying to carry the excess to other machines bits at a time. I almost forgot we were also making some organic crystals by Green Science, because Casimir crystals take titanium crystals, so after requesting some organic crystal imports in the local logistic station, these chem plants can also go away. The next things we'll want to research are upgrades for how high we can stack labs and how many items the highest tier of sorter can move at once. We want these because we're finally stable enough to start designing the block system that will carry us through the rest of the game, and naturally we'll want to use the best building tech possible to make our blueprints. Fair warning, I haven't really checked out any other Dyson Sphere megabases, so I have no idea what the meta is. This is all just what made the most sense to me. Here's the basic idea. Each block will start and end with a single interplanetary logistic station. Each ILS can support 12 belts, 3 in each direction, so the rear 3 will be taken up by Green Science and Proliferator outputs, plus a warper input. Because Green Science turns into warpers at a 1:8 ratio, it's much cheaper to ship Green Science and turn it into warpers on site than it would be to ship warpers directly. The other 9 belts will be divided into 3 groups of 3 ingredient belts, all of which will be proliferated because all input ingredients have to be proliferated to actually get the extra products bonus. We can also proliferate the Green Science for even more warpers. All that gives us space for each assembler to reach up to 3 input ingredient belts plus 1 output belt. That covers basically any assembler-based recipe that we'd actually want to create a block for, so we'll just reuse this design for basically every assembler recipe, even the ones that need fewer than 3 input ingredients. Yeah, it's not very belt efficient, but not needing to design multiple versions of this block is an efficient use of my time. I'm going to be staring at these blocks for most of the rest of the game, so it's worth it to take the time to make these look as aesthetic and symmetrical as I can. In theory, this design can be extended as long as we want, or at least as long as a saturated belt of items could support, but in practice, we'll want to define a standard length for these blocks. It looks like ILSs need at least 24 tiles of space between each other's center points, so let's be safe and say they need 30 tiles. That means we'll want to place each block with an ILS center point 15 tiles offset east or west of a meridian. There's 250 tiles between each meridian at the equator, so if we want to be able to fit 2 blocks between each meridian, that's 125 tiles per block, minus the 15 on each side for ILS breathing room, which all gives us 95 tiles between the center points of the input and output ILSs. And as it so happens, that means we can fit 20 assemblers per row, with exactly enough room left over to route all the belts with their proliferator sprayers at the front. As for the other dimension, it appears we can stack 3 blocks vertically between the equator and the first tropic line. It also appears that we could fit some lesser number of blocks horizontally around the next couple of tropic bands, albeit with some significant visual curvature. Now, of course, this design is just for basic assembler-based recipes. More complicated recipe chains will need different block designs, although we'll still want to fit them into the same dimensional area. Proliferators are the first major divergence. Much like Factorio's modules, I'd like to treat the Tier 1 and 2 proliferators like intermediate ingredients in the production chain for the real Tier 3 proliferator. So I come up with this design that feeds each tier's assembler directly into the next tier's assembler, while spraying everything along the way. And look what a perfect amount of room we have. Boy, I sure am glad I didn't make any critical oversights here. Then comes the question of how to move Proliferator back through the build for proliferating the input ingredients. I could drone it back, but instead I run this super long belt from the output all the way backwards to the warper assembler. After setting up an advanced miner for the coal that makes Tier 1 proliferator, let's see how this works. And yeah, seems to work well enough. Let's move on to smelting. Smelters are smaller than assemblers, so we'll try to fit 4 rows in the vertical space rather than 3. They also don't leave quite enough room between them to squeeze in some power poles, so we'll have to break them up into groups of 4. And because I'm a little bit insane, we'll proliferate the raw ores. I probably shouldn't have done this, but my vein utilization research was still quite low at this point, so I was a bit paranoid about running out of raw resources. Extend the smelter pattern forward a bit, and we can get 96 smelters to a block. Not bad. This is when I discover Dyson Sphere's Area Delete feature. I do prefer Factorio's click and drag, but this is still very nice. It's like a magic eraser. Next up is a steel-specific smelter. If I could go back, I wouldn't have wasted any time on this, but in the moment I wanted a smelter design that converted ore directly into steel. Unlike steel, a bespoke design for titanium alloy smelting isn't optional, because it needs 3 inputs rather than the usual 1. This will just get 3 production rows rather than 4 to make room for all the belts. This is about when my chat informed me of a critical oversight. You can proliferate the Tier 3 proliferator for even more prolif per prolif. which I can just barely make room for at the end by shuffling the last output sorter back 2 tiles and flipping the spray coater around. It definitely would have been a better idea to just run the proliferation belt backwards from the output ILS instead of running it all the way to the input ILS and then all the way forwards again. And while I could shift-delete the whole thing and redo it manually, it turns out there's this handy reverse path button that instantly flips an entire belt around, which handles like 90% of the heavy lifting here. Neato. Next up, chemical plants. As with assemblers, I want to reuse this general block design for as many chemical plant-based recipes as possible. Luckily, chem plant recipes are never more than 2 ingredients in or 2 ingredients out, so we'll just make a 2 in, 2 out blueprint. To my surprise, these pack quite tightly. There's even room for power poles above the plants. The bounding boxes must be weird on these. We can fit 10 plants per row, plus a bit of breathing room on either end. Here, one of my stream viewers showed me a cursed blueprint string hack. Ever seen stacked solar panels? Anyway, next is particle colliders. We really only need this design for strange matter. I'll handle antimatter separately. And after lots of annoying belt finagling and handcrafting, we end up with 3 rows of 8 colliders. This time around, I won't be using colliders for deuterium. I build a fractionator, and Mr. Flatvoice finally explains how it actually works. Would have been really nice to know this before I made my first one, so I wouldn't have misunderstood how it works and dismissed it out of hand. We'll be setting up 2 big hydrogen loops here. Any hydrogen that doesn't get converted into deuterium by any fractionator in the loop will be fed back into the loop with a priority input splitter for another pass. The deuterium output will just go down the middles. We get hydrogen literally for free from gas giants, not to mention even more hydrogen as an unwanted byproduct of things like advanced graphene production, so there's absolutely no reason to proliferate the hydrogen input. Here's another fun little quality of life feature: the ability to increase or decrease the gap between machines when clicking and dragging them. Unfortunately, fractionators can't just be placed on top of belts the way turrets can, so I have to manually connect all of these together. Then, once again, I get bit by collision. Despite there visually being plenty of room for a power pole to fit here, the game refuses to let me actually place any. So I have to push the top and bottom rows of fractionators out by 1 tile and then reconnect them all manually. And now, finally, it's time to deal with labs. With maximum research, these can stack up to 15 high, which hilariously can clip right through an ILS. I could apparently leave it like that, but for aesthetics' sake, we're going to have fewer stacks of labs per row so they don't clip. Let's start by trying 3 groups of 4 stacks of labs, separated by substations. I've been trying to spare you from all the breaks I've been taking to handcraft the supplies we need to draft out these blocks, but it's worth pointing this out specifically for labs because 3 rows of 12 long and 15 high means we'll be fitting 540 labs into a single block. That's annoying enough that I'll set up a dedicated mall station just to make labs. And actually stacking them all that high is incredibly tedious. But skipping ahead a full 20 minutes, we have a stupid tall lab setup. And I do mean stupid. Look at this. It goes past the cloud cover. Interestingly, when you use area deconstruct to delete stacked labs, they don't all disappear at once. Instead, the top one gets deleted first, then the next, until the entire tower has shrunken down to nothing.
I was in the pool!
Now, this design works well enough for the 2 in, 1 out colored sciences, but white science takes 6 input ingredients, 1 of each colored science plus antimatter. And since I'd like my research lab block to be able to handle colored science research in addition to white science research, we're going to make white science as an intermediate within the research block. So both the white science labs and the research labs can grab colored sciences. Each ILS on both sides will serve as input, so both will get in green science and proliferator for warpers. Horizontally, there seems to be enough room for 4 groups of white science and research lab pairs, but vertically, this many input belts makes for a block that seems entirely too tall. For some reason, my curiosity gets the better of me here, and I try pasting the basic lab block up towards the tropics just to see if it manages to avoid colliding with itself, and it doesn't. Which means half the blueprints that I've made so far are probably broken because I didn't design them far enough south. I want to at least fix science before continuing on, and this rearrangement manages to just barely avoid clipping with the ILSs on either end. Woo. Alright, the last major block design is for oil refining. I'd like to get pure refined oil out instead of needing to deal with a hydrogen byproduct. And if that means I need to sacrifice some coal to consume said hydrogen with the reforming recipe, so be it. For that reason, this design will consist of pairs of refineries, one refining plant feeding directly into one reforming plant. Ideally, I'd also have liked to integrate plastic production into this block, since that's the only thing we'll need the oil for going forward. But chemical plants are too chonky to fit into this belt array, so I'll have to settle for using a separate chem plant block for the plastic. I'm honestly not sure how collision isn't triggering for these sorters and power poles, given how close we're placing the refineries to each other, but I guess I shouldn't complain. Here I realize we shouldn't be proliferating the coal, since we don't have room between the pairs of refineries to also proliferate the hydrogen and refined oil intermediates. Actually, on second thought, why don't we try doing exactly that? I clear some space between refineries, and I think I can get away with just one proliferator spraying one output belt in the middle, rather than 2 separate filtered outputs for refined oil and hydrogen. Even with proliferation, they should be produced in the original 2-to-1 ratio. And that leaves us with exactly enough room for 4 pairs of refineries per row. At this point, I have to start testing some previous blueprints for self-collision, and it turns out the proliferator block has exactly 2 sprayers that aren't very fond of their neighbors. Interestingly, some of the other sprayers can be placed just fine by bots, but then they start complaining about collision if you delete them and then try to put them back exactly where they came from. I still have absolutely no idea why this happens. Well, for now, let's ignore that and just put the proliferator block by the equator so we can move on to something more interesting. A shopping mall. That starts, as most malls do, with sacrificing your soul to the auto industry. Very tediously selecting every recipe we want to make in an assembler so we can count how many assemblers we need, which turns out to be 59. But annoyingly, we also need to make room for an energy exchanger with a much larger footprint than an assembler, because again, that's the only way to make full accumulators for orbital collectors. That makes for a total of 60 manufacturing entities. So where will I be making this mall? The one place I can't really fit anything else. The pole. To start, we'll make an inner ring of 8 ILSs that will take in any ingredients we need from this planet or wherever else we're making them. Then an outer ring of smaller planetary logistic stations, or PLSs, will grab items from the ILSs and distribute them via belts into neighboring assemblers, similar to the way we did in the first mall design. This oil well is in the way of where I'd like to put a box, and Foundation doesn't seem to bury it. Turns out Foundation burying resources is an option in the hotbar. I really should dig into all of these options at some point. After plenty of mucking around, I end up with this concentric, twisty arrangement of assemblers outputting into logistic-enabled boxes. Copy-paste that a bunch of times and scatter some substations in there, and pretty soon we have a mall layout. Trypophobes, look away. Or is it trypophobes? Anyway, I tally up exactly how many input ingredients we need for these 60 items, and it turns out to be 39 inputs, which means we only need 8 input ILSs. The last slot in the last ILS will go to green science, which, you guessed it, will be transformed into warpers and then dumped onto a circular belt, so we can feed every ILS with warpers from just one ILS with green science. Next problem. Power. We are making antimatter fuel rods here for personal consumption, so dumping some of those onto another circular belt and using that to feed a few artificial stars should take care of the mall's power needs. Assuming we can keep it fed with antimatter, of course. Then one last circular belt, this time for missiles. As with other turrets, missile turrets are pass-through entities that can be placed directly onto ammo belts. So rather than feeding these with sorters, the belt actually has to take a little diversion upwards to feed through the middle of the turrets. But I think that looks pretty neat. The center looks kinda bare without that 9th ILS, so why don't we throw a planetary shield generator in there? Testing whether the bubble will actually cover this whole mall will require some power, so let's hand feed the artificial stars.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
And minus the substation satellites poking through the top, the single shield generator does in fact cover this whole thing. But unfortunately, we have to rip half of it down. See, I took an entire day between the last sentence and this one trying to assign recipes to assemblers in an arrangement that would make it feasible to feed them all with belts from PLSs. And while that might maybe be possible, it definitely wasn't worth the effort to attempt it. So instead, I'm going to handle this whole thing with logistic bots. You know, the option I didn't want to use earlier because individual boxes can only be filtered to one item apiece. Well, that's still an annoying restriction, but it's also still less annoying than belts. Because some of these mall items need 5 inputs, we'll need to make a pattern where at least some of these assemblers are surrounded with 6 chests, 5 input and 1 output. Some of these chests will be shared between assemblers, but that's not a problem provided we can find an arrangement where some neighboring recipes have some common input ingredients. After copy-pasting this pattern all the way around the tropic, we end up with exactly 60 assemblers. Pure skill. Now, because chests can only interface with bots, and logistic stations can only interface with drones and vessels, we need to bridge the gap between them ourselves. That means pushing every input ingredient out of its respective ILS and into what will functionally be provider chests, one for each ingredient. And before I forget, let's replace one of these assemblers with an energy exchanger. Naturally, we'll make empty accumulators in the assembler directly above the exchanger, and then feed fully charged accumulators to a neighboring assembler tasked with making orbital collectors. And since PLS to ILS to orbital collectors is a telescopic recipe chain, the ILS assembler will border the orbital collector assembler, and PLS will border ILS, so the outputs of one can feed into the inputs of the next. This is the main challenge of this design, arranging the assemblers for maximum input chest sharing. Here we're putting planetary shield generators next to corvettes because both of them are made with particle containers. Then particle colliders next to shield generators because both of them are made with supermagnetic rings, and so on. This required over an hour of time and having a checklist open on another monitor with every item I wanted to make and all the ingredients for each item. I got some hate comments last video for being a Factorio snob, but guys, I really like Dyson Sphere Program. It's because I like it that I want it to be the best game that it can be. And this is a good example of an area where I know it can be better. It doesn't end with the recipes either. Once we got all those settled, the last step is to add logistic bots. But in this game, bots are married to the specific logistic hat you put them into, which means we can't just dump a few hundred into one logistic hat and call it a day. Instead, we have to manually input some into every single provider hat. This process is at least made a bit easier thanks to this arrow in the hat UI that automatically grabs bots from your inventory, but you still need to open every relevant hat and click every relevant arrow. And speaking of clicking, we also need to manually set the item filter for the chests, manually toggle the input chests to not interact with the mech, and manually toggle them to request from or provide to other chests. It is way less tedious to do the Factorio thing and have half a dozen separate logistic entities that act differently, rather than having a single logistic entity that can be configured to act half a dozen different ways. Anyway, one logistic route for the Annihilation Constraint Sphere is apparently too long for the bots to handle, because I wasn't paying close enough attention to that when laying out assembler recipes. But thankfully, the bot range limitation is at least upgradable with research. With all that set up, we can tear down the duplicate recipes in the old mall, stuff like power poles, belts, and the like. Intermediate ingredient crafting has to stay up, at least until we have proper blocks for those. Let's celebrate our new production with some more cleanup. We don't need to cache any silicon products since we're shipping those in from elsewhere now. We don't need stone smelting. Well, we do, but I want to do that off-planet as well. We are going to move Dyson Sphere production to the outermost planet so the local solar sail production can go. And obviously the full accumulator production area can go since the mall is handling that now. Okay, so for some reason I get it in my head here that it would be a great idea to skip over ordinary smelters entirely and just start slapping down plain smelters, despite the fact that they draw 4 times as much power and we're pretty short on that as is. Oh, yeah, and another problem. The only resource that isn't at least trickling into this mall is the unipolar magnets they take. Those can only be found around neutron stars or black holes. We have one of each in this star cluster, but the closer one has 2 hives orbiting it and like a dozen bases on its only planet. That means we need to go in prepared for all-out war. After stocking up, I start warping over, but warping takes constant energy, and I run out a bit far away from the planet. At least the neutron star looks pretty. This game's visuals are fantastic. Okay, we're finally here, and yeah, those bases look a bit more formidable than the ones back home. The usual battery of 8 missile turrets with basic ammo just ain't cutting it. This thing is absolutely swarming with units. They almost take down a signal tower, so I have to put up a second one just to spread the aggro around. I figure we could use more DPS, so I try splitting half as many missiles across twice as many turrets. And that helps, but it's still not enough. These bases are just churning out units way too fast. Equipping the new antimatter capsule helps enormously against unit waves, but seemingly not as much against the base itself. At least I remembered to deploy space fleets against the relay stations, although doing so almost immediately triggers a hive attack. Starving the bases of hive resources does eventually pay off, although the antimatter capsules are doing most of the heavy lifting. Eventually, I earn the dubious distinction of pissing off 12 planetary bases at once. That is quite the light show. Half an hour and a dozen bases later, we have finally taken the planet, and we used up almost all 800 missiles we brought with us to do it. There's only one small patch of unipolar magnets on this whole planet, but that should be sufficient when we just need them to make plain smelters. And there's also a much larger patch of fractal silicon close by, which means easy crystal silicon. After setting up an ILS to make those resources available to our homeworld, we can fly back there. But again, I involuntarily drop out of warp too early due to lack of power. To combat this, I research faster mecha energy recovery speed. Recharging is happening constantly, even while power is being drained, so faster recovery speed is the equivalent of draining more slowly. That should let us make the whole trip without issue. And that upgrade works splendidly, but in the short time we've been gone, the hives have already dropped another 4 new bases here. I'll spare you the combat because I've actually figured out how to do this now, so they go down easy enough. After a bit of thought, I decide to change this planet to ship out the crystal silicon output, not the fractal silicon input. Yeah, it's twice the warpers owing to the 1:2 production ratio, but because the only thing fractal silicon is used for is making crystal silicon, saving warpers would require putting a fractal to crystal block anywhere we wanted the crystal stuff, which is a more tightly coupled system architecture than I'd like. Besides, with all these core holes scattered around, we have plenty of geothermal power to put up a crystal silicon block right here. And thanks to that recovery speed upgrade, we just barely managed to make the journey back to the outermost planet of our home system. Now that we have a new supply of crystal silicon, we can kill off the high purity silicon to crystal silicon smelting here, which should also help boost our high purity silicon numbers. While I'm here, I'd also like to tear down these old miners and replace them with the new advanced variants. Guess which part of that process I got distracted from and forgot to actually do? If we're going to lay down any more blocks, we're going to need more ILSs, which the mall isn't making any of due to a lack of particle containers. I go grab some from elsewhere and handcraft a few. We're going to need a better supply of many of these mall intermediates, so why don't we focus on that next? I go to lay down a new assembler block, only to discover that the mecha's logistic storage is apparently a parallel dimension that construction drones cannot cross into. If you want to build with any of those supplies, you first have to drag them into normal inventory, which seems to me like an entirely unnecessary distinction. Anyway, this block will make particle containers, which need turbines, copper, and graphene, the last of which is the only one we already have in decent quantities. Next, I want to make processors, but we don't have enough Tier 3 belts for this block because we're short on supermagnetic rings, which are also made from turbines. So until we can get turbines, let's make progress by swiping a bunch of the Tier 1 belts that I wisely made a stockpile of earlier and downgrade everything. I claimed in the last video that there was no downgrade tool, and thank you to the 100 or so commenters who pointed out that I am blind, or perhaps just dyslexic. As with mass deletion, I still prefer Factorio's way of just click and dragging the entire 2D area you want to change, but this magic eraser technique is still pretty neat. Next, I'll lay down some blocks for microcrystalline components to support processors, plus those supermagnetic rings, and also a graphite block to support the rings. We're running out of higher tier sorters just like belts, and again because no turbines, so I'll steal some tier 1 sorters and start liberally applying the downgrade tool again. Another new block, this time for photon combiners. There's an advanced recipe for these, but it just replaces prisms with grating crystal. We have plenty of stone to smelt, but not much grating crystal, so we're sticking with the basic version. The Tier 3 assemblers for this prism block aren't showing up either. We don't have enough particle broadband or quantum processors for those, so they have to get downgraded too. Then, when I go to place a glass smelting block, I run headfirst into the old mall. I don't want to tear that down yet because it's still feeding the new mall, so let's just move the smelter block north. Now, if you've been wondering when the hell am I going to start making the turbines I keep complaining about not having, I assure you there's been a method to my madness. I want to turn this lava planet into a forge world. And I don't just mean smelting. Anything that can be made purely from iron and copper, like turbines, I want to make here. Blocks on this planet have to be placed a bit more carefully than they do back home. We don't want to intrude onto too much lava, not only because it costs foundation and soil, but also because of all the free geothermal power we can extract from the lava patches, which we'll be using to fuel our metallurgical endeavors. Endeavors that are quickly brought to a grinding halt because I'm out of smelters. That's worse than it seems because smelters take stone bricks to make, and I don't have any smelters making stone bricks. We should have just enough supplies cached in the system to justify tearing down bits of the old mall now, so let's do some of that and stand up a brick smelting block in its place. That still doesn't solve the catch-22 of needing smelters to make the things that make up smelters, so I have to go around scavenging for smelters in the old base that we don't need anymore. After finding a few and setting them up, they give us enough stone bricks to make a few more smelters, which we also place here to make more stone bricks to get more smelters to make more stone bricks. The next major block I want to stand up is for plasma exciters. I'm sure most Dyson Sphere veterans who just heard that sentence are now nursing a sudden neck injury from the double-take whiplash, but don't worry. Eventually, I do figure out that this was a terrible idea. Anyway, I need some more space, and these ray receivers are in the way, so let's relocate them all to the North Pole. By this point, I have a solid stockpile of smelters again, so let's finish setting up the lava planet. Here's some blocks for copper, iron, and steel. Except the steel block has some power poles that are too close together when the block is placed this close to the tropic line. Oh yeah, I did need to fix that. I can't get away with one power pole here either because it just barely doesn't cover a single sorter. So I have to set up this weird little offset arrangement that ruins the nice straight grid. Oh well. Once we remember the magnet smelters this time, we can tear down the old smelting area, except for the titanium because we have too much stockpiled and nowhere to move it yet. And after that, we can put up blocks for magnetic coils, electric motors, gears, circuit boards, and at last, the hallowed turbines. Told you we'd get there. Back home, we need to stand up some titanium glass, and putting up all those blocks on the lava planet has more or less exhausted my building supplies. So you get treated to the sight of 1,000 individual white lines pointing to all the stuff I don't have. I bet the YouTube compression algorithm will just love this clip. The point of putting this block here is for water access. This is definitely just Factorio brain, but shipping unbarreled fluids just feels wrong. So instead, I want to make things that take fluids on planets that have those fluids natively. I don't even want to put water into a logistic station and make drones carry it. I'd rather just belt it straight in. This is a big lake, so after placing some foundation for the pumps to sit on, we just throw a bunch in a row. I probably didn't need enough water to cool a single AI data center, but I'll be damned if this build will be bottlenecked by an infinite resource. In case you were wondering, yes, we do have to proliferate that water. Productivity bonuses are pegged to the lowest bonus across all input ingredients, so we can't get away with only proliferating the glass and titanium ingots. Also, here's an advanced graphene block and me tearing down an older advanced graphene build. Supplies here are finally decent enough that I can grab some ILSs from the mall instead of continuing to handcraft them off-screen. Then I have to make a quick trip back to the neutron star planet to repair some damage from a hive raid. I accidentally exit warp too early, but at least the slow ride over is a pretty one. Another catch-22 with our supplies. We're dry on iron ingots because our smelter belts aren't fast enough to carry as much iron as these blocks can make, but we can't upgrade the belts without more iron. Clearly, the solution is to just lay down another iron smelting block with Tier 1 belts. It's still bottlenecked, but at least now we have two necked bottles instead of one. Hey, remember that dedicated iron mine we set up south of the old mall to feed it?
And it's gone.
It's easy to forget sometimes, but mega bases need mega resources. To ease those demands, I want to scale up proliferator production, so the next block is for carbon nanotubes. We're still using the basic recipe for these because I haven't found a good source of stalagmite crystals yet. We'll also need diamonds, which we're currently making from kimberlite ore. But just like the fractal silicon to crystal silicon chain I mentioned earlier, and for the same reasons, I want to switch this to shipping the finished diamonds instead of shipping the raw kimberlite. In theory, those nanotubes and diamonds should mean lots of proliferator, but in practice, the nanotubes are still dependent on graphene, which we're short on because that process is clogged on the hydrogen byproduct. That means we need something that eats hydrogen. It looks like Casimir crystals absolutely devour hydrogen, but in addition to more graphene, they also need titanium crystals, which in turn need organic crystals. So, we'll get to those in a minute. Apropos of nothing, did you know this game lets you take a piss? I mean, okay, technically what's happening here is that I'm equipping and throwing gobs of water as if they were grenades, but, like, get real. Tell me that's not what you see. Anyway, the new mall is working well enough that we can finally wipe the old mall off the face of the planet. That's not to say it's working perfectly, of course. We should have plenty of processors in here, but we're short on those because no microcrystalline components because no high-purity silicon. The root cause is that there just isn't much silicon in system, and what little there is isn't being mined because... Oh, right. I tore down the old miners and forgot to stand up the new ones. But that was only supporting 6 smelters anyway. Let's give this a proper smelting block, shall we? We'll stick this as close to the single silicon patch on this planet as we can manage. That's not just to ease drone traffic. I also have plans for the equatorial area, so I want to keep that clear. Needing to set these smelter recipes 4 at a time because of power pole interference is getting very annoying. Maybe I'll do something about that later. You may recall that I also forgot to set titanium mining back up, so let's do that and then smelt it into ingots. Not alloy, God no, I am not shipping in sulfuric acid, I refuse. Besides, we need ingots for titanium crystals anyway. The silicon miner isn't extracting silicon quickly enough to keep the smelting block fed, but just in case you thought the advanced miner wasn't awesome enough yet, you can also tell it to work faster, and it just will. It does take more power, but that's incredibly nifty. Anyway, right in the middle of setting up the titanium crystal block back home, our power, or rather lack thereof, finally begins to assert itself. For now, we'll put some of our personal antimatter fuel rods into the mall's artificial stars, but we're clearly not making antimatter fast enough. That means we need to start focusing on building out the local Dyson sphere, but we have a lot more production we'll need to set up to make that happen. The Casimir crystals we've been aiming for are used in the carrier rocket chain, so for the moment we can at least keep going down that particular path. As mentioned, Casimirs eat a ton of hydrogen, but they also need graphene, and ironically we currently have no graphene because we haven't been eating any hydrogen yet. For the moment, let's ignore that and work on titanium alloy, which is used in a bunch of stuff, also including the carrier rocket chain. That means it's time to find a planet with a sulfuric acid ocean. After the usual base clearing, we'll set down the alloy block near-ish some acid lakes, which are much smaller than I expected. 10 pumps per belt of acid will have to be enough. Liquid pumping speed does scale with vein utilization research, so even if this isn't quite enough for now, it should be enough eventually. Aside from acid, alloy also takes titanium ingots and steel, and conveniently we have the titanium and iron ores for those right on this planet. Then I go to check up on the organic crystal supply and discover something neat. If two planets are close enough to each other, like with this multiple satellite gas giant, setting missile turrets to target upper air won't just hit relay stations on their own planet, but also on the other planet. Anyway, next up will be plane filters and then the quantum chips that take plane filters. We need those for green science so we can keep making the warpers that will keep our interplanetary empire running, well, smoothly would be an overstatement right now, but close enough. Needing more blocks means needing more empty space to put them in, which means more tearing down of the old spaghetti base. It may seem silly to rip out wind turbines when power is this low, but ideally the infrastructure we'll be replacing these with will contribute to better power in the not-too-distant future. I want to modify this new refined oil block to get its oil in on belts rather than from drones, like we were doing a minute ago for the titanium alloy block on the acid planet. In retrospect, dumping liquids into logistic stations and just letting drones deal with them is way easier. And you should definitely ignore this decision if you're watching for pointers in your own base. Eventually, I do wise up. Speaking of bad decisions, I think I have it in my head here that regular chemical plants can't be upgraded in place to quantum chemical plants. Or maybe I just didn't want to deal with upgrading. Whatever the case, quantum chem plants need strange matter, so I have to steal some from the old green science build and hand feed it into the mall to make our fancy chem plants. But that method won't last much longer. It's just a few more blocks to go until we have at least some of every ingredient we need. Anyway, that block will be for plastic to make particle broadband, which is about the only thing plastic is used for besides higher tier explosives. Then a frame material block, also used in the carrier rocket chain. Since we have an advanced graphene block now, deadlocked though it may be, we can clean up the older advanced graphene build. But we'll leave the hydrogen-burning thermal plants in place so we can keep churning out antimatter. There's an iron patch lingering between the oil and plastic blocks. My instincts are screaming at me to exploit it, but it wouldn't be worth the hassle when it's right in the middle of the base. Especially now that we have stable iron imports from off-planet, so I reluctantly pave it over. That leaves us enough space to paste a graviton lens block. Lenses also need strange matter, but tropic collision strikes again. Apparently I'll have to redesign this block for a bit more breathing room between colliders. Well, we're still choking on hydrogen, and strange matter does require deuterium, so maybe fractionators are a better choice for this space. But those also collide on the southernmost row. I guess that means we need to redo the fractionator block. And just like the first go-around, I figure there's surely enough room for power poles to fit between fractionators. But despite the increased spacing, I am again wrong, so I again need to rip out the outermost rows and replace them to make room. All this extra production means the low power flashes are back with a vengeance. Even with all 4 Mallstars fueled, the local power grid is still nowhere near sufficient. But that's the problem we're trying to solve. A bit more clearing away of the old to make room for the new, and I accidentally dismantle an import ILS that was chock full of hydrogen, crystal silicon, and steel. At least some of this stuff I can shove into other ILSs in the blocks proper. This is partly why I usually don't allow these things to work at maximum item capacity. So I have room to hand place items from stations I'm trying to tear down. But even so, I can't find a place for everything I littered, so eventually I give up and slap down a few battlefield analysis bases to collect the junk and worry about it later. In better news, the hydrogen demand for the deuterium block means our graphene is flowing again. This is where chat told me that you can press Shift-Delete to void items in your cursor, which I immediately use to get rid of the hydrogen clogging the babs. I still want to save the silicon and steel if I can. Then a bit more station dismantling. This one is also full of too much stuff, so I set its item limits to 0 and hope the mall will eventually consume its contents. Alright, we have some high-tier supplies now, so I think it's about time to turn this system's outermost planet into a Dyson Sphere production machine. That means a block for carrier rockets, and blocks for the sphere components and deuteron fuel rods they require. But like our home planet, this one barely has enough power right now, and it definitely won't have enough power once these blocks are running in earnest. And we're not done with the blocks either. Sphere components need frame materials and solar sails. Sails are at least easy enough. We're already making their graphene and photon combiners back home. We'll put the finished sails together here on Pluto because we'll also want to launch them here. Though for now, they're all going to making components. While those buffers fill up, I return to find a backup of critical photons not being made into antimatter, before realizing I accidentally deleted the thermal plants, so the collider is clogged on hydrogen. That seems to be increasingly something of a theme. Speaking of colliders, I need to finally redo that strange matter block. Easy enough, just space them out a bit more. That gives us 21 colliders per block instead of 24, but that's no big deal. What is a big deal is the power they draw. If you thought our power grid was in bad shape before, check it out now that we have 21 particle colliders online. But the strange matter they're making is critical to helping us solve this very problem, by making the graviton lenses that are used in rocket silos that are used to build frames that are used to make power. By this point, we have plenty of solar sails cached, so let's just draw them straight from the output ILS and start shooting them. The rail ejector turrets require a healthy amount of clearance from each other, but we have enough room to fit 3 rows of them in the height of a standard block. There they go. There's nothing for the sails to attach to yet, but this should still increase antimatter production and thus help the home planet limp its way to silos. It might also help on the margins to delete a few more things that aren't seeing use anymore. There goes the core of the old base, the very first things I laid down way back when I started Dyson Sphere program. It's a little nostalgic, but it still has to go.
I told you we'd clean this up. It will be clean.
I wonder why titanium glass isn't producing, only to realize I gave the input ILS no logistic vessels with which to pick up titanium ingots from off-world. Whoops. Fractionation was also missing vessels. This should pull from local hydrogen first, but having vessels means it can top itself off from orbital collectors. Our first advanced graphene build over by Green Science can go now, and rather than try to gradually drain its fire ice, we'll just delete it. Other resources I care more about, but fire ice is literally infinite. You know what else can go? The entire rest of the Green Science build, as well as local sphere production. Not all at once, of course, at least not without littering, and I'm still being as resource conscious as I can. In fact, I'm so intent on not wasting products at this point that I make a special trip to Pluto just to rehome the sphere ingredients I've picked up. This base keeps vacillating between too much hydrogen and not nearly enough. It seems Casimir crystals have completely eaten through the graphene backlog. The solution is to travel to the gas giant next door and lay down a full complement of 40 orbital collectors. I've seen a post or two suggesting that orbital collectors have inherently lower priority than other logistic stations, so in theory, these should serve as backup to the hydrogen coming from graphene without taking precedent and causing a graphene blockage again. In theory. Okay, so we're launching plenty of solar sails, but they're not attaching to anything because sphere components are dead, because frame material is dead, because it has no titanium alloy, because it also has no green science for the warpers it needs to actually go get alloy. I thought we'd have more warper headroom than this, but apparently not. That means we need to stand up a green science block, despite the awful power, because we need it for power. Side note, I do need to make one blueprint change here. This block design largely uses pull-based logistics, meaning the input station is responsible for going and getting a block's ingredients. However, if an input station ever ran out of warpers, or just didn't have any to begin with, it wouldn't be able to send a vessel to go get more warpers, or anything else, and the block would grind to a halt. So to make sure that can't happen, green science, and only green science, needs to be push-based, meaning the output station is responsible for sending green science wherever it needs to go. That way, even a totally empty input station can be force-fed the warpers it needs to kickstart itself back to life. In hindsight, I would have made everything push-based, but at this point the decision has been cemented and we just need to live with it. It's here, at last, that we finally catch our first glimpse of our sphere production sprint paying off. We actually have a tiny backlog of critical photons, which means we can add more antimatter colliders and get ourselves a bit more power. To do that, we'll need more artificial stars than the 4 in the mall we currently have, and I'm not sure where I want to put those yet or how I want to set up fuel rod production for them. So for now, let's just tack on a couple stars right by the colliders. You know you're desperate for power when you're spamming wind turbines onto a MEGABASE planet this late into a run. But we've now made enough rocket silos that we can stand up a whole line of them on Pluto, which means places for solar sails to attach, which means the sphere output will actually increase instead of the sails gradually falling into the sun, which means more power back home. We're slowly but surely climbing out of the hole. Now, carrier rockets take quantum chips, which in turn take plane filters. Those are very slow to craft and we need more, so here's another block. That in turn means their component Casimir crystals will be consumed faster, which means more hydrogen demand, so we can actually support another graphene block too. We've also stashed enough higher tier building materials that we can finally afford to go back and upgrade the lava planet for better raw resource throughput. Except power here is insufficient too. It's actually worse than it looks because much of this is idle owing to an iron shortage. But power on lava planets is a very easy problem to solve. Just slap down a bunch of geothermal plants and we're back in business. I wondered why the neutron star planet wasn't giving us any crystal silicon, only to realize I embarrassingly forgot to put any drones in the input ILS to actually pick up the fractal silicon. At least there's no power problems here. There shouldn't be, there's barely any industry, but this many former relay stations means lots of free geothermal here too. You know what, we have some headroom and we're here anyway. Let's give ourselves a bit more high-purity silicon. But you may have noticed all these destruction notifications. The Hive got mad at our home planet while we were away. I guess the missile turrets in the mall just aren't cutting it. Reconstruction is slow, but we can speed it up by placing some battlefield analysis bases for more construction drones. Once that's done, we can delete the only remaining bits of the base from the previous video. We have officially transitioned into the MEGABASE phase.
The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
Not one to shed any nostalgic tears, I'll immediately take advantage of the new free space. Solar sails still can't attach fast enough before dying because there's a couple upgrade techs for that. That means we need our first science blocks. We already have green for the warpers, which means here we need red, yellow, and purple. I designed these as a single generic block that needs its recipe copy-pasted, which is an ordeal when everything is this tall. But we can't research anything just yet because, while you've probably forgotten by now, I didn't really finish designing a viable research block. I'm still enamored with the idea of an integrated White Science Plus research block though, so here's an initial attempt that uses vertically oriented pairs. Then triplets of intermediate sciences and antimatter can be diverted in between for consumption. Despite my being rather fond of this idea, I'm not going to use it because it's just not very space efficient. But I'll leave it on screen for a moment so you can figure out how it works if you want to try this design yourself. A slightly more compact layout that just barely fits in our allotted vertical space is 3 rows of 4 pairs laid out horizontally. Interestingly, the rows have to be offset from each other by a couple tiles in order for the sorters drawing from opposite sides of the belt to not conflict with each other. That means the proliferator belt passing through these sprayers facing in opposite directions can remain perfectly straight. Obviously, the first ILS output has to be red, green, and blue science, in that order. Makes it go faster. Now we just stack everything 15 high, and we have ourselves a research block. If you happened to notice that I didn't mention where I was making blue science, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about it. Blue science just takes magnetic coils and circuit boards, both of which are made purely from iron and copper. So in keeping with the Forge World theme, I'll be making blue science on the lava planet. This is the first block that's obviously bottlenecked by belt speed. The earlier labs are consuming all the ingredients before later labs can get any. There is a research upgrade that can solve this, however. You can get logistic stations to automatically stack their outputs. This is also why I wanted the highest tier of sorter for everything. Only the highest tier of sorter can pick up or drop off an entire stack of items at once. Anyway, now that we have our basic sciences, we can research some tech again. And even with no proliferation and massive power problems, we're still zooming our way through these, at least compared to the old base. I was wondering why the high-purity silicon feeding purple science from upstream was low, only to remember that we had all of one silicon mine here.
And it's gone.
That means we need to find more in a totally new system. This planet has plenty of silicon plus some other rare resources, so excuse me just a moment while I bring death upon my enemies. There we go, brand new high-purity silicon. The power grid back home is slightly less bad now. I just noticed this proliferator block is 2 tiles farther south than it should be. It's not interfering with anything, but what kind of megabaser would I be if I didn't fix such an egregious oversight? Speaking of oversights, 1 row of graphene plants in this block hasn't been producing any graphene this whole time. Not because it's clogged on hydrogen again, although it is also clogged on hydrogen again, but because I somehow missed setting a fire ice output filter on the logistics station. Alright, time for more research. Let's queue up the ability to control more space fleets first, because I haven't given up on hive extermination yet. Then let's go for ray receiver efficiency and solar sail attaching speed, both of which should give us more power. We're up to needing a 3rd collider making antimatter. I think such a notable upswing in power capacity is a good reason to make a more robust artificial star design. Also, I want this block space back. Everything required to make antimatter fuel rods and their component annihilation constraint spheres are in the logistics system as mall supplies, so for this first attempt, we'll piggyback off the mall. Some back-of-the-napkin math tells me that 1 antimatter fuel rod assembler can support 4 artificial stars. Similar to the mall itself, I want to make a simple pattern that I can repeat in a circle, so let's set up 2 pairs of stars to keep them roughly in the same width as the assemblers and boxes. All the rods from every assembler will get dumped onto a single clockwise belt that every star will draw from, and it looks like we can repeat this pattern every 20 tiles, including room for substations between. And since this tropic is 500 tiles in circumference, that gives us exactly enough room for 25 repetitions, meaning a nice, even 100 stars. It's a testament to our improved sphere production that, even while this is still under construction, some stars are already being lit. We're up to about 75% sufficiency now. You know what? While I'm thinking about antimatter, I think the next task should be an antimatter design. And because I want the equatorial bands free for production blocks on this planet, why don't we make it an all-in-one ray receiver to antimatter design at the other pole? A bit more napkin math tells me that 5 ray receivers working full blast with proliferated graviton lenses boosting their output can saturate 2 antimatter colliders. It'll be quite a while before our sphere can support that kind of output, but I'd rather future-proof it. Receivers take up more space, so those will sit on the outside of the circle, and their photon output can get sent straight up the middle to a pair of colliders, one on either side. Those colliders can then filter output onto separate belts for hydrogen and antimatter, and we can repeat this pattern 10 times. I was feeling pretty proud of this until I realized I forgot the lens input, so that needs to be weaved over the photon belts and fed in from above and below the receivers using a ton of splitters. Anyway, once I fix that, I have to figure out how to get antimatter and hydrogen into a single ILS that I'm going to place exactly on the pole. Splitters are the obvious answer, but weird bounding boxes strike again. Even though this splitter is nowhere close to clipping into the colliders visually, there's no convincing the game of that. So the belts have to be shuffled inwards to dodge them. Now ideally, I'd like to delete this hydrogen so it can't possibly back up and stop production of antimatter. There's no perfect solution to that, but we can at least use this space around the ILS for a few thermal generators and just continually burn some of it off. And after hooking up some input power for the colliders, it seems to be working. Which means the old and busted spaghetti colliders can finally come down, along with the handful of artificial stars they were directly powering. Then, as a stress test for our new power production, I queue up a bunch of colored science, since it's only white science that requires antimatter as an ingredient. Even under load, we're holding steady at about 65% sufficient. That may not sound all that great, but remember, our production blocks are spitting out tons of solar sails and carrier rockets, which means more power, which means faster production for even more power. We're very much in a virtuous cycle now. And about that production. This is when I read an in-depth post about exactly what proliferation gets applied to and how, and it turns out proliferation straight up doesn't work on oil cracking or refinement recipes, meaning this oil blueprint is wasting both proliferator and physical space. So there's no real excuse not to just butt these refineries right up against each other. I try fitting 6 pairs of refineries per row, but I have to settle for 5. Hey, that's still a 25% increase in production density. I also have to make another edit to the ray receiver blueprint because I forgot to bring in green science for warpers. This is another issue that could have been solved with broader use of push-based logistics, but this is just how I decided to do it. Regardless, that means we need to clear off the thermal plants to make room and then do these truly awful belt wiggles just to get proliferated green science into a warper assembler. And we shouldn't forget to proliferate the lenses while we're here. That boosts a receiver's maximum draw to a whopping 480 megawatts, the equivalent of a critical photon every 2.5 seconds. Unsurprisingly, our sphere absolutely cannot provide us with that kind of power yet. We still have plenty more to build. So for now, we'll cut off the supply of lenses to the pole. I'll miss the aurora borealis effect they make, though. Now, some of you may remember 10 minutes ago, when this planet got hit by a hive attack that our missile turrets weren't able to completely fend off. I do still want to destroy that hive, but until then, why don't we actually research the endgame gravity missiles? Once we do that, and then research its prerequisite crystal explosives after the missiles that take them because this game's tech tree is kind of messed up, we've actually unlocked every tech in the game. It's just upgrades left. Okay, now Pluto is having power issues, which is an extremely stupid problem to have on a planet where we're making deuteron fuel rods. So obviously we're going to solve this by belting those rods into a gigantic block of fusion plants, and voila, back at 100% sufficiency. Here's where I finally realize that plasma exciters absolutely do not need an entire block dedicated to them. Away they go, to be replaced by more carbon nanotubes. Now, longer term, we'll need well over 100 gigawatts of Dyson sphere power to sustain 1 million research hashes per second worth of production. That's going to require a lot of ray receivers and antimatter colliders, so I'd like to cram them into a block format. Unfortunately, that 5:2 receiver to collider ratio means there's just no good way to put both receivers and colliders into the same block. So instead, we'll break them into separate blocks. Sticking with a single ILS for both input of graviton lenses and output of critical photons means we can fit 35 receivers in a single block. To make the most of the vertical space, we'll want belts to be shared between rows of receivers. A single lens belt can curl around and back in, while photons can get dumped onto one shared belt down the middle and one dedicated belt down the bottom edge. The antimatter block is dead easy. We're just repeating the strange matter layout with fewer belts and filtered outputs. In a shocking twist that absolutely no one could have seen coming, using deuteron fuel rods for power means we no longer have enough of them left for actually making the sphere. So let's slap down some more fuel rod production, some more fusion reactors, and some more deuterium fractionation back on the home planet to feed them. We're at least making plenty of solar sails, but sail ejectors have to be facing the star to fire them. The solution, unsurprisingly, is to spread more ejectors around the equator so there's always some ejectors somewhere that are facing the star, which will give us a continuous stream of new solar sails. I'm reporting live from the home planet, and there's not a power problem in sight. We still have plenty of expanding to do, which means a lot of dark fog clearing, so let's try to make some of those gravity missiles we just unlocked. Doing that in the mall means we need to bring in a few new ingredients, like acid. Purely on principle, I was hoping to avoid having to ship acid between planets, but this feels like an appropriate time to give up. This crafting chain takes 6 new recipes, some of which take 4 input ingredients, which is why I'm making these in the mall, because I refuse to stand up 6 blocks for something we just don't need in mass quantities. I'd suck it up if we were farming dark fog for their advanced drops, but I'm not doing that because I don't feel like it. It takes me a stupidly long time to come up with a build that's even vaguely visually pleasing, but eventually I get something passable. We'll use bots to bring some of these new missiles into our mall turrets. And since we're not making basic missiles in the mall anymore, that frees up 2 assemblers that we can use for something else. I elect to set one to make plasma exciters because I should have done that in the first place, and the other to make mini fusion plants because we've been using those occasionally anyway. That requires a bit of rearranging of neighboring chests for ingredient sharing, but thankfully it can all be made to fit. While I'm sprucing up the place, let's tear down this old proliferator block design and replace it with this new 3-stage design that I made off camera. The increased density will give us 50% more proliferator per block. The like and subscribe sphere as it currently exists will be complete soon, but I'd still like more power capacity, so why not add to it? Obviously, I'd like any additions to be thematically appropriate, and let me tell you, drawing something that looks like a thumbs up from above on polar coordinates is not an easy task. A ringing bell is much more straightforward. More sphere surface area means more solar sails, so in the interest of actually completing the sphere this go-around, let's double our sail ejection. We've finally researched the maximum level of inventory capacity, which is great because we're going to need every bit of it going forward. Not everything we want the bots to keep us stocked with will fit in logistic inventory, but the remnants are things we'll need very rarely, like oil extractors or sail ejectors. It's still a bit frustrating, but I have bigger problems, like these occasional hive raids. Well, we have many more space fleets at our command now, so let's go take another crack at the local hive. The initial assessment is actually promising. Soon the enemy fighters are all down, and it's only the hive superstructure left. A bit later, and we have successfully secured this entire solar system. For now, at least. Mr. Flatvoice warns that they can come back, but that's a problem for future me. In the meantime, for your sake, I've been skipping all the audible mineral depleted warnings, but they've been going off constantly in our home system. We've chewed through so many minerals that our iron and copper blocks are actually starting to get throttled a bit, so we'll supplement them with some new mines. For now. Another thing we'll need more of is Dyson sphere power, much more than our home star could realistically provide us with. The efficient thing to do is to seek out another, higher luminosity star and build a completely new sphere. So here's the brightest star in the cluster. I want to take this planet for sphere material launching, but those dark fog bases look angrier than the ones back home, which means they get to be guinea pigs for our shiny new gravity missiles. Yeah, seems like they're pretty good. This block couldn't be simpler, just an input logistic station and a line of rocket silos. I did the math, and it turns out a single rocket manufacturing block can saturate basically as many silos as we could ever realistically want. So rather than stand up another manufacturing block, we'll just be importing extra rockets from the manufacturing block we already have. Similar story for solar sails. The production we already have is more than sufficient, so these blocks are just an input station feeding into a bunch of ejectors. This is all an investment in future power, not power we currently have, and I don't want to skim off the antimatter from our home sphere just yet. But we don't need to support a ton of power draw on this planet anyway, so instead I set up fractionation to support some deuterium fuel rods for a block of fusion generators. That takes hydrogen, and I have no idea how much hydrogen we'll eventually need. Well, I do, almost 4,000 a second, but I don't really know how many orbital collectors we'll need to place to support that. Collector productivity scales with vein utilization research, meaning the further we go down that research path, the fewer collectors we'll need. So rather than plan for a perfect target, I'm just placing the maximum number of orbital collectors on every gas and ice giant we happen across, and hoping the game is smart enough to draw hydrogen from graphene first if I accidentally place way too many collectors. Anyway, now we actually need to draw out our new Dyson sphere, and I decide to have a bit of fun with this one. I forgot to change the shell to maximum radius, but Mo's a pretty small robot, so let's just pretend I meant to make it this size. And off goes our first delivery. That is beauty. Next, we're obviously going to need a planet to dump a ton of ray receivers on so we can actually use the Dyson sphere. The closest planet in this system is actually an ice giant somehow, and while it does have a terrestrial moon, I figured the giant it orbits would occasionally get between the sphere and the ray receivers and cut the power. So instead, we'll take the closest solo planet. There's a few angry residents, but nothing we haven't faced before. Now, yes, I know receivers are technically more efficient when placed at the poles, but I have two reasons for starting at the equator. One, we're going to need way more receivers than could fit exclusively at the poles, and two, once you add graviton lenses, they can work for the majority of a day, so the point is mostly moot anyway. We need a bit of bootstrap power here before we can start relying on local antimatter, so here's some temporary fusion generators. And once those are up and running, we have some colliders making antimatter. I happen to run out of supplies while doing some vein utilization research, and while I'm restocking, I happen to notice that most of our research labs aren't actually researching. A bit of math later that I failed to do beforehand, and it turns out research labs can consume science several times faster than white science labs can produce it. So we'll shrink the research lab stack size from 15 to 5. Also, hello there, achievement for a Tier 1 belt's worth of white science. While I'm poking around, I also notice that the entire middle row of research towers has had their white science input sorters facing the wrong way, meaning we've been researching at 2/3 capacity this entire time. Then the lava planet next door needs more power again, so let's add more geothermal. A lot more geothermal. Okay, I know what I just said about receivers at the poles here, but I want to draft out a blueprint that can wrap around this one. You know how we're powering the home planet with artificial stars around the mall? Artificial stars are the most efficient way to take advantage of Dyson sphere power, so that's what we'll want to transition to using basically everywhere we can. And since I want the equatorial bands clear for the usual production blocks, why not fit all our artificial stars around the poles? Making antimatter fuel rods requires 5 ingredients: processors and particle containers to make annihilation constraint spheres, then add on titanium alloy, hydrogen, and antimatter for the fuel rods themselves. We'll split them across 2 logistic stations, so each station also has room for warpers. Fitting the warper assemblies between everything else is a bit of a squeeze, but we make it work. The best part about this blueprint is that I get to call it the Ring of Power. Okay, my next target for industrial improvement is a couple of gas giant satellites rich in fossil fuels and organic crystals. The Tropicana one also has some decent silicon reserves. We always seem to need more silicon, so we'll target that one first. But as it turns out, spotting dark green silicon against a dark green landscape is a little difficult, especially at night. Wind turbines alone aren't gonna cut it now that we're fully transitioning to using plane smelters, so let's drop another fusion generator block, which also gives us headroom for some microcrystalline components and processors. Okay, remember how I mentioned earlier that the dark fog could reappear in a system you cleared out? Well, they did. A hive in another system sent a seed hive to our home system, and it's already established a new landing base on Pluto. So we have to clear that out, and then the new hive. But it's still quite small when we catch it, so it goes down in a matter of seconds. Anyway, some of the artificial stars we set up on the Mo receiver planet have kickstarted themselves, which means the fusion block there can go away to make room for even more receivers and colliders. But remember, those colliders produce hydrogen along with their antimatter. I decide the sanest way to deal with that is to put some Casimir crystal production on this very planet. Casimirs eat so much hydrogen that I also decide to make some graphene here, so the Casimirs can eat some of that hydrogen byproduct too. You might recall the ice giant next door, so this is a convenient location to make graphene anyway. Here's another planet that we're exploiting for stone to make glass and bricks, which lets us delete the glass and brick blocks on the home planet and replace them with 2 blocks worth of strange matter. I don't entirely remember why I wanted to do this, presumably something about graviton lenses, but this took me an hour and a half, so I'll be damned if I don't make at least a passing note of it. I know I've said it before, even in this video, but I'll say it again. This game's visuals are killer. While I'm gawking at the Mosphere, might as well triple it. It's maybe halfway done as is, but that's only netting us about 25 gigawatts, and we're going to need about 5 times that to get out of here. Hey, remember when we were trying to tackle a couple of fossil fuel-rich gas giant satellites? Let's actually do that. There's a ton of resources here that we want, which is great, but it will limit where we can actually build. At first, I try belting crude oil straight into the refining block from the rear, which works, but it's pretty cumbersome. So here's the new plan. Try to find oil seeps in rough clusters, belt all their crude into a centrally located logistics station, and just let drones move it like we do with every other product. My Factorio brain is still screaming at me that this is a fluid and it shouldn't work this way, but while it does feel silly, I can't deny that it works. The neighbor satellite is also loaded with coal, which means it's time to deliver more freedom. And rather than prematurely declaring mission accomplished like some ex-presidents I could name, we'll also deal with the root of the problem by taking out the local hive. Speaking of hives, the one in the Mosphere system got very angry while I wasn't looking. But it still has a sizable network of relay stations throughout the local planets feeding it resources, so we'll need to deal with those first. They're not very happy either. There's also a single base on this water world. One wonders why they even bothered. Okay, this hive is very well defended, but let's take a crack at it. Slowly but surely, we're chipping away. We do get to the hive itself, but not before running out of corvettes. So, after a restocking trip, let's try that again. Nice and clean. The like and subscribe sphere is officially complete. This is also when I finally noticed that I built Mo too small, and I could have avoided needing to triple it if I had just built it bigger in the first place. Oh well. Anyway, this planet that we just took is stupidly metal-rich, so why don't we dedicate the entire planet as a forge world? See, this session is about when I finally ran our production target for the 1,000,000 hashes a second through an online calculator, and discovered how many hundreds of blocks I'll have to lay down to sustain that pace. So we'll need multiple planets just for smelting raw resources, and like 20 more entire planets for everything else. And of course, a ton of artificial stars on every planet to keep it all running.
We're in the endgame now.
If this smelter array looks a bit different, that's because it is. This is an updated blueprint that runs power between rows instead of between smelters. Because of that, it's packed 25% tighter, and setting recipes by clicking and dragging can be done 15 at a time, up from the previous 4. But I don't just want to smelt here. Like the lava planet in the home system, we might as well make anything that's pure iron and copper right here to cut down on warper traffic. Here that could also extend to titanium, although we will start to bump up against building space limits eventually. Speaking of that lava planet, it's served us well, but its resources are starting to run a bit dry, and I want our forge worlds to be on the edges of the cluster anyway, since much like Factorio, resources get richer farther out from your starting system. So why don't we start drawing this entire planet down? I have a better use for it in mind. Okay, since this forge world is a sulfuric acid world, let's put a little of that into a solitary logistics station and bring it in with drones to make local titanium alloy, the same way we're doing for crude oil on that orange juice planet. Jump cut to after a bunch of copy-pasting of assembler blocks, and you just might end up with a forge world. Okay, when I was upgrading from the Tier 1 stuff on the lava planet, somehow I totally missed this gear block. It's just been crippled this whole time. So now I have a bunch of Tier 1 stuff clogging up my inventory, and rather than run home to dump them into the mall for reuse, I'm just deleting them. Really shows how far we've come that I'm comfortable doing that now. Anyway, here's the better idea for this planet. Turn the whole thing into a science planet. We could use one anyway, seeing as we'll need 54 blocks of labs between all the sciences, and finishing our mission in the system we started in just feels right. Obviously, 54 blocks plus power will require almost the entire planet's worth of surface area, so this all has to go. This one science block is off by a single tile, so it has to go too. Glitter is more fun when it glows. Naturally, the next thing we'll want to set up on this lava planet is more forge production. If you're confused about that, surprise, this is a different lava planet. Here we get an achievement for a single Tier 3 belt's worth of white science per hour, which by my count is still less than 7% of what we'll need for 1,000,000 hashes per second. To be fair, we haven't been producing or researching consistently, so in terms of actual progress, we're quite a bit farther along than that, but even so. When zooming out to the cluster view, we can start to see some meaningful vessel traffic in between systems where we have a noteworthy presence. Right now, that's all of 3 systems, but that's about to ramp up real quick. At this point, I'm slightly concerned that the Mosphere won't be able to keep pace with our impending expansion, and rather than just increase sphere production in that system, I decide to make a 3rd Dyson sphere. This system looks like a great candidate. Unlike with Mo, we'll remember to make this as big as possible, although that does mean it will almost certainly be unfinished by the time we reach our production target. When considering something to write in the sky, it helps to think of messages that people could use reminders for. This seems appropriate, though let me tell you, making that G look even remotely decent was a struggle. And just to put the sphere in Dyson Sphere, let's cap it with a thematically appropriate cracking egg. Paint the letters a chat-requested color, and we have our 3rd sphere design. Also, I needed a bit more forge production, so here it is. Despite plenty of scouring, I haven't found a planet that's so rich in silicon it could serve as our only source of it. But this planet next door to our 3rd forge at least has some. Then in the extra space, I put some plane filter blocks because those were bottlenecking our carrier rocket production, plus some processors and microcrystalline components because those take silicon. Again, just trying to cut down on warper traffic where possible. Then, circuit boards and magnetic coils. I don't know, processors do need circuit boards, but mostly I put them here because I wanted to check them off the list and they fit in the space. I've already been to this planet, but only for its silicon and not its fossil fuels, so let's pay it another visit. This was a while ago too, apparently. The silicon smelter is using the old blueprint, and it's running on fusion power. Let's fix power first. This is another new design I made off-camera. Basically just a bunch of artificial stars with integrated fuel rod production, same as the ring design, but this one fits in the same circular footprint as the polar ray receiver build. So I can put this down first on any planet, and put the ring around it later if I need more power. I shall dub this design Power Pole. 10 minutes later, I wonder why it's not warping in any hydrogen despite having green science, and discover the warper assembler was never hooked up on this side. I'm a professional, I swear. Anyway, time to mine as much coal and oil as I can get my hands on. This proliferator blueprint has also been updated slightly. Now, instead of using the Devil's ratio, it uses 5 assemblers per row of Tier 1 proliferator, 6 assemblers of Tier 2, and 7 of Tier 3. Because each stage of proliferator is also being proliferated, this is a more optimal internal ratio. This planet even has a single patch of stalagmite crystals. I'll take them, but we'll need a ton more of this stuff if we want to completely transition to the advanced nanotube recipe. But you know what, we can at least put down one advanced nanotube block right here. Might as well save a few warpers. Then we'll fill the rest of the planet with plastic, oil, and graphite. Time to tear down the fusion block. Or at least, try to. This is a lot of deuteron fuel rods to just delete from existence, but I don't really feel like flying it all the way back to dump it into carrier rocket production. So here's something else we can do with it. This neighboring planet has a touch of kimberlite ore, so we can put down a new fusion block and get ourselves a bit of diamond production. Not sure why any kimberlite is coming in remotely, though. I guess it might be coming from this other planet with the exact same biome. Again, we've been here earlier too, but this particular planet has much more kimberlite. So why don't we spruce this up with modern block designs and power too? The trans-rights sphere is actually making some power now, so it's time to start setting up ray receivers, which means the local dark fog has to go. There's some great metal and kimberlite patches here, but in the name of power production, we will be burying and ignoring them all. The hive in this system is humongous, but it's manageable as long as you don't try to bite off the whole thing at once. Here's where I start learning how to navigate the production panel. Most interestingly, Dyson Sphere provides you with a reference rate for every resource, which is the theoretical production and consumption maximum of your builds. That's incredibly handy for hunting down system-wide bottlenecks. So remember a while back when we were on a 2-moon system and the missiles from the moon we were on were targeting relay stations on the other moon? Well, that other moon is also loaded with coal, oil, and silicon, so let's go back and colonize that one too. I'll be sparing you the constant restocking trips back to the home planet, but just remember that all these building supplies have to come from somewhere. I'm also laying down 1 or 2 science blocks at the start of each trip back out, just to spread out the demand for labs. Chat just discovered that we can turn off individual audio alerts in the settings, which means we no longer have to listen to constant pings for things like flight mode, cruise mode, or mineral depleted. Well, that was a lot of distractions, but let's finish setting up this round of fossil fuels. Okay, I just discovered where all that stalagmite crystal was hiding. Literally under the surface of the ocean on that water world in the Mo system. At first, I figured I'd set up nanotube production right here, but just the power pole blueprint ate up almost a quarter of my 6 million soil reserves. Well, we'll have to mine out this planet either way, and using Foundation to expose resources is never not funny. By the way, this is why I typically use wind turbines instead of standard power poles to build out electrical networks. They can be placed directly on water without any foundation or soil needed, which is extremely convenient. By the time I've finished setting up every possible mining outpost, my soil is half gone. Yeah, okay, nanotube production needs to go somewhere else. This planet looks good enough. Yeah, it's in another system entirely, but give me a break. I'd already used the entire rest of the system the stalagmites came from. Okay, for most blocks, I'm just using the generic layout regardless of how many belts the recipes actually need. But stalagmites to nanotubes is a 1-in, 1-out process, which means if we just changed recipes on the standard chemical plant block, we'd be using twice as many belts as we'd need to. And across a whopping 38 blocks of advanced nanotube production, I'm sure you can do the math. So we'll set up a custom belt layout for just this recipe. It ends up skinny enough that we probably could have fit a 4th production row in here, but whatever. Here's another thing I've been cutting out, occasionally deleting dark fog seeds from systems we've previously cleared. I guess it's theoretically possible to kill all the dark fog in a cluster, but that sounds way more tedious than just doing an occasional bit of weeding. On a whim, I decide that we're going to pave over the entirety of the lava science planet. There's an achievement for this too, but take my advice. If you want to pave a planet, pick a biome that gives you soil instead of taking soil. These lava trenches may seem sparse, but filling them all in is a surprisingly significant drain on our soil reserves. A few restocking runs later, and we've set up all the carbon nanotube production we'll ever need. Except we're only mining like a third as much stalagmite as we need to saturate all this. Thankfully, you can access and change logistic station settings remotely, and since advanced miners count as logistic stations, we can tell them all to work harder from anywhere in the cluster. But that's still not enough. So let's bump up our vein utilization research, and hope the mining speed boosts that gives will bridge the remainder of the gap. We're hitting about 250,000 hashes per second, although right now that's mostly just because we've been letting a bunch of science buffers slowly fill up in the background. That seems like a good reminder to start tearing down science blocks on the home planet. They're still perfectly functional, but I just want to consolidate all these on one planet. Besides, that gives us some room to set up a foundation block. Completely paving a planet costs 326,000 foundation, so that one mall assembler probably ain't gonna cut it. Here's another new planet in another new system. This one will be for more fossil fuels, plus titanium glass. This biome looks pretty. The planet happens to be tidally locked, which would mean perfect ray receiver uptime, but the star it's orbiting is pretty mediocre, so there's not much point making a sphere around it. As with acid and crude oil, we'll pump water into an ILS and move it around with drones to facilitate titanium glass manufacturing. And while I already had enough regular glass manufacturing capacity elsewhere, this planet has plenty of stone, so I thought I'd save myself a potential warper bottleneck by just making more glass right here. Then we top it off with a bunch of proliferator, oil, and plastic. This other planet in the same system will serve as a production planet. I don't even need resources from here. In fact, I'll be paving over every single resource on this planet. I literally just need the space to slap down a bunch of blocks. Some of these I wanted to put on a forge world because they only need copper and iron, but there wasn't really enough room on our 3 forge worlds to fit everything we needed. So, wherever. Here's good. We could also stand to make some titanium crystals and particle containers. Another paving run on the lava planet, this time under existing blocks. I really wish I'd thought to pave this place beforehand. At least you can hold shift to force foundation to place in a straight line. Then I run into a storehouse filled to the brim with old steel. I can't believe I'm doing this, but even if it did fit in my inventory, I don't really want to make a special trip just to dump it somewhere useful. So I will be deleting all of it. Next on my agenda is more silicon, as well as soil. The wiki tells me the Gobi biome will give us both, and I could swear I've seen one of those around here somewhere.
Lost a planet, Master Obi-Wan has. How embarrassing.
Aha! It feels very silly to scribble foundation like this over elevated parts of a planet just so I can shove a bunch of dirt in my pocket. But then I did make a dedicated foundation block. Might as well put it to use. Once I'm satisfied with my soil reserves, I set up some high-purity silicon smelting and some microcrystalline component production. This planet also has a spot of coal, so I will be turning that into a spot of proliferator. Some more paving of the science world, and this angry red text box is the game throwing a runtime error. Apparently, placing foundation near but not on this core hole caused some kind of array index out of bounds exception. I had to restart the game and reload an autosave to fix it, and then it never did it again, so whatever. At this point, we're going through belts so quickly that our one mall assembler, tireless work ethic aside, is still falling behind demand. So I copy-paste the entire belt assembly area like a little wart sticking out from the ring of power. That's one way to double production of a critical ingredient. After who knows how much manual foundation placing this took, we've finally paved over the entire science planet. But there's no achievement. I was quite scared that I missed like a single tile under a science block somewhere and that I'd have to go through and repave the whole thing. But several seconds later, the achievement finally triggers. Phew. I've been slacking a bit on power here since it's been mostly idle, but there's going to be a little over 20,000 labs working here at full blast, so we'll need all the artificial stars. Anyway, that Gobi planet could use some processor blocks. The planet next door also has some decent silicon reserves, so that gets even more high-purity silicon smelting. Then some more processors can go on a sulfuric acid planet in a neighboring star system. That may seem like a strange choice, and stranger still to put microcrystalline components here, but there literally just isn't enough room on that silicon planet for as many blocks of this as we need. Some quantum processors can go here too. They take processors, and I'm still placing these with half an eye towards minimizing travel distance and warper usage. And then some particle broadband because, I don't know, it's also blue. I'm cutting out most of the dark fog clearing because it just gets kind of samey after a while. For the same reason, I'm trying to hunt down old planets to refurbish so I don't have to conquer as many new planets. For example, the old diamond smelters on this planet can get ripped out and replaced with the new plane smelter blueprint. This looks impressive, and I guess it kind of is, but all I can see here is how much copy-pasting I'm sparing you from. We still need more coal for more proliferator, and this planet has some. The dark fog here is low level enough that I can take these bases on foot with just antimatter capsules. No missiles required. As with belts, we've been setting up so many artificial stars that our production here can't keep up. In this case, the actual bottleneck is their component annihilation constraint spheres. We're making tons of those for antimatter fuel rods, but they're all being direct inserted from assembler to assembler, so they're not accessible by the logistics system. So I rearrange the fuel rod production by them all such that the constraint spheres have to pass through a logistic accessible box. Replacing the old pattern with the new one is a bit tedious, but once it's up, we will never be bottlenecked by artificial stars again. I only noticed while writing this script that the calculator I was using had the graviton lenses in the ray receivers set as not proliferated, which meant it was telling me I needed twice as many ray receivers as I actually needed. So I totally didn't need to set up a third sphere or a second ray receiver planet at all. But, hey, trans rights. This receiver planet rotates horizontally, which ordinarily makes it a great ray receiver candidate. But in this case, it doesn't even matter because the sphere is bigger than the planet's orbit anyway, which means 100% receiver uptime no matter how it rotates. While I was pasting the last of the white science blocks, someone in chat noticed that there were two sorters that didn't have a power connection. I have no idea how they spotted that, let alone how it happened, but those sorters just move colored science into a couple of research blocks, so right now I don't really care. I'll fix it in the blueprints later. Let's just take a moment to appreciate this ray receiver planet. Then I had to go find way more coal and set up a bunch more proliferator. Listen, we needed 52 blocks of the stuff, and that's not counting the coal we needed for oil and graphite too. The trans-right sphere is putting out a nice amount of power, Mo is up to 114 gigawatts, and the call to action is just happy to be here. Okay, there's still a few more things we have to check off the list before we're ready to take a test spin. This planet will get the rest of the graphene production, plus the rest of the Casimir crystal production to hopefully eat all the graphene's hydrogen byproduct, plus the rest of the titanium crystal production because that needed to go somewhere. Crystal silicon can't go just anywhere because I want to get that via fractal silicon, but there was a bit of fractal silicon within this same system. We'll dump the remaining fractionation on that planet too. I'm not convinced that gas giant mining will get us the deuterium we need directly. And besides, doing it this way means a bigger potential sink for the graphene's hydrogen output. We'll also put particle containers here. We should be good on Proliferator by now, but I'm still deliberately dodging the coal patches here, just in case we end up needing them. Coal is maybe the single most valuable resource in this game, in terms of how important it is versus how common it is. Okay, strange matter. We need almost 40 blocks of this, and it's all particle colliders, which means a ton of power. Just to give you a sense of how much copy-pasting I'm speeding through for your sake, Strange Matter alone took me about an hour and a half. But we're almost done, I swear. This planet will get graviton lenses and plane filters, although strangely what it's not getting is power. There appears to be a particle container shortage, and that in turn appears to be because no graphene, which presumably means we're clogged on hydrogen. I figure maybe that's because we just haven't been researching anything, so I queue up a bit of vein utilization. Half an hour of research later, though, we still have no particle containers, which means that particular hydrogen just isn't being consumed. In theory, this is solvable with the logistic station priority feature, but I'm sorry, what the hell is this? Man, all I wanted was a slider. It's hilarious that we have to do this at the very final hurdle, but here's a regular graphene blueprint. I'll want to make enough graphene using the regular process to completely supersede the advanced process, so we don't have to rely on clearing any of that hydrogen. And since regular graphene takes graphite, that means we'll need 6 new coal to graphite smelter blocks to feed it all. I thought maybe I was being overly cautious with those coal patches a minute ago, but apparently I am actually a genius. The other ingredient it needs is sulfuric acid, so here we are pumping some more of that on an acid planet that we've already colonized. I'd like to stick the actual graphene blocks here too, but we have to fit them closer to the poles, and it would seem I haven't completely eliminated latitude-dependent collisions from this blueprint. So we need to find some more room somewhere to put the rest of it, and by complete chance, I find a sulfuric acid planet that we've conquered but haven't built anything on yet. I kickstart this grid by hand, and particle containers are on the way. Back on that graviton lens and plane filter planet, particle containers have also come in, so we finally have power there. It would appear the new graphene production is already doing its job. Once we finish pasting all the 30-something plane filter blocks we need, that should be everything. In theory, we're finally good to go, so at last, it is time for science. The wiki and the calculator both told me that mecha core research runs at twice the hash rate compared to almost any other research. So I try that, but we appear to be stuck at about half our predicted output. Everything seems to be running fine, so what's the problem? Well, there's another research called research speed that just straight up increases hash rate for every research. So let's just do several levels of that to get us over the line. I have no idea if this is considered cheesing the achievement, but I am not about to double this entire cluster-spanning base at this point, so this will have to be good enough. Well, we've crossed 1 million, but that doesn't give you the achievement straight away. You actually have to keep that up for a while. In theory, this is what we've spent all this time building all this infrastructure for, but will it be enough? We've done it. A sustained 1 million research hashes per second. I added the mission complete jingle in post because after all the effort this took, I feel like this deserves a second in-game proclamation of victory. Let's take a moment to appreciate the spheres that got us here. The like and subscribe sphere is complete, so if you made it all this way into the video, I hope you've done that. The Mo triplets are most of the way there, and trans rights, perhaps fittingly, is still a work in progress. But even in its unfinished state, I mean, look at this. What a view! I'd have to say that all this infrastructure build-out was totally worth it. And the best part is that now nobody can complain that I didn't play the game right. I also caught a bit of flack last time over some of the criticisms I had about Dyson Sphere, but now that I'm officially in the top 1.3% of Dyson Sphere players, my opinions have completely stayed exactly the same. The lack of an undo feature is bonkers, fluid on belts is silly, a basic circuit system would be nice, and many parts of the UI could use a second draft. Oh, and the upcoming physics-based vehicle update makes me think the devs are getting distracted by shiny objects. I even have some brand new criticisms now. Making a mall is a royal pain, and the station priority system is an absolute mess. My kingdom for a single slider that lets me reliably consume hydrogen byproduct. But all that said, I cannot stress enough that I really do enjoy Dyson Sphere Program. I wouldn't have spent another 150 hours playing it if I didn't. The beauty and the sense of grand scale is unmatched in the genre, and I love that megabasing is more than just encouraged. It seems like the whole point. If you like building big in other automation games, you owe it to yourself to play Dyson Sphere Program, even with its rough edges. Now, as always, I'd like to thank my lucky stars for all my patrons and YouTube members, whose incredible generosity is what makes projects like this one possible. It's equal parts humbling and heartwarming to know that you all like what I do enough to support me financially so I can keep making these videos for you. Thank you all for being the solar wind in my sails. If you'd like to join such fine company, and maybe get some extra perks like these blueprints, consider signing up at the link in the description. And thank you for watching. I hope to see you again next time.